Okay, so I would like to introduce a slightly different perspective insofar as I'm not representing, say, a specific digital edition project or a single institution. I'm here to represent e-Editiones, which is a society whose members work on various digital editions worldwide and share an interest to advance some of the enabling technologies behind those editions. In fact, I think I also worked with several of the editions which are represented in the audience in the room as well as externally. What I would like to do with this talk is to share the experience of 25 years of building communities, a process which 2020 eventually then led to the foundation of e-Editiones. So we will go back in history 25 years to where it all started. And we start, as every tale starts with once upon a time. So it was back in the year 2000, and back then XML was still fairly new and very exciting, and all this hype around it, which later then, in my opinion, destroyed some of the magic and was also misleading. That hype had not started yet. So back then, by coincidence, a town south of Frankfurt called Darmstadt, a university town, it suddenly became a hotspot of the technology. Because at the same time, there were like groups, teams of people, well, 2 teams and 1 single person, working on tools to better process XML. So at the same time, there were free XML databases being developed in that very town. Free XML databases, the first one was actually created by a big player in the database market, an established German corporation, which exists still today. I think the XML database is no longer accessible, though there might still be users. There was another product developed by a very big German research institution. And then finally, there was one started by a sociologist in need of processing larger quantities of XML. That was me. So the latter eventually then became XSDB. Already once in this talk, we saw XSDB on one of the websites, namely Dragor had it down in the corner. And it first started in 2001, so quite a long time ago. And I would also like to talk a bit about how it started for me, because as already mentioned, I'm a sociologist by education. In Darmstadt, I had my first job at university after graduating in sociology, and it was at the Institute of Sociology. And the project I was hired for in 1998, 99, I'm not exactly sure when it was, but it was called Virtual Library of Sociology. And well, I was obviously hired as a sociologist, but it turned out that I was the person who could actually program, because I did a lot of programming as a teenager. So it turned out I could program, so I did most of the software development in that project. And that project was then followed by another one called Socionet, and it was largely inspired by mathematics and physics, because back then already in maths and physics, it became like common to actually publish your papers on MathNet, FISNet, and so on, before the journals would actually accept it. So this kind of pre-publication, it was much more common in physics and maths already. So we tried to somehow do the same for sociology. So this idea to actually make sociological research available online so you can access it, that was already in the background there. And I hope you will see how this then leads later, 25 years later, to TI Publisher and other things which are basically, which basically share very similar ideas. However, back in 2000, in the early 2000s, the time was maybe not right yet, at least not in sociology. People would still keep their papers in Schublada, so before they were published in a journal and were absolutely not ready to share. So, however, ExistDB, it continued. So I think major marks in time are maybe like 2006. Until then, the developers, we were like a bunch of developers working together. So while I started the first 2-3 years on my own, other people joined, and we were a bunch of developers. And it took like 3-4 years until we met in person the first time. And it was in Versailles, and I really remember the event very lively. And then 2007, we organized the first community event during the XML Prague conference and continued with those events over the next years. And the first time there were only like 5 people attending, then there were 20, then there were 50. So it was growing. 2015, I was approached by Sebastian Ratz. At that time, he was in a working group, and Magdalena also was a member of that group, and they were trying to come up with a new specification within the TI guidelines for something called processing model. And while I was first skeptical if that would work, I implemented it and found, hey, this is the solution to many of the major problems I had so far. So I really got hooked on it and continued, and this then became TI Publisher, which was first released 2015, around that time. And finally in 2020, all the source code of TI Publisher was handed over to e-Ediciones, which is a non-profit society. So, disclaimer, some of my good friends and colleagues may not like this, but for me, doing business was never the point. ExistDB was always just a means to an end, a tool for a purpose. I never started it with the idea in mind, hey, now I'm becoming a software developer and I will get rich. I was just a sociologist who needed certain tools and had to create them because they were not available at the time. But for sure, my idea was always leaning towards open research, open society. I'm also not the kind of developer who shouts hooray when seeing a nice piece of code, because I'm rather not interested in software as such. What I enjoy is if I see people do cool things with what I created. So, and until today, I'm sometimes still having the shivering moments if someone shows me like some complex X-query code they wrote, and in my head I think, wow, would you ever think that this language you implemented, it would actually work? And I'm just amazed that it does. So I enjoy seeing people doing things with what I created, and not the things I created in particular. Okay, so next point, what makes an open source project successful? And I think one factor is that it should encourage hacking around and tinkering. And in this way, ExistDB is not a product of top-down engineering. It's to a large extent, well, there certainly is a vision behind it, but more in the sense of we have an idea of what we would like to achieve, what's the perspective we would like to achieve, and less that's how we want to do it. It has also been organically growing over the years in a more symbiotic relationship with the community, which I will explain in a minute. Giving some examples, yeah. Because what made me start on actually implementing Xquery, for example? So Xquery, that's the programming language in which TI Publisher is written, or the language which you can use to query TI stored in the database. And at first, when this standard, it's a W3 standard, when the standard came out, I thought, yeah, it's nice, but well, it's like, it's another database query language. Do we really need it? So I was not very convinced. But then Yannis Yanidis, who is, I think, a German philologist, approached me and said, hey, we are doing this edition of Der junge Goethe in seiner Zeit. So those are early writings of Goethe, and we want to do this. And actually, we think that the features exist has so far, they are not sufficient. And we need something else. So he said, can we do this Xquery stuff? And the project actually paid for the very first version of that. So this was not, what I'm trying to say is, this was not like, yeah, that I would have decided, okay, now we're doing Xquery. It was more that someone approached me, and this someone was not a computer scientist. So someone doing an edition actually triggered implementing this. The same, in fact, happened later also with, say, Digital Mishnah, because they were in need of a very dynamic display. So where you could have like transcription, translation, critical apparatus, facsimile all side by side, and you could switch between things. So they needed to have this very dynamic, and the earlier versions of TI Publisher weren't really good for this kind of dynamic display. So in fact, they paid for introducing web components into TI Publisher, which are now a very important part, because they allow you to like use a little Lego block which then in fact displays a certain text, and you can have multiple of those blocks on a page and you can rearrange them. So it makes it really easy for users because it gives you this toolbox experience with which you can play and rearrange things and so on. So again, another edition project actually asking for a certain technology. And then finally, the reason why we then also got this web-based annotation editor, that was a longer story, because we did web-based annotation. So that's if you have like the base transcription, but you want to enrich it with semantic references to people, links, and so on, then you can do this in this web-based annotation editor, which avoids you having to look at the XML tags. So it's quite powerful. And okay, the US State Department, they have the Office of the Historian, and they need to publish large volumes of diplomatic correspondences every year. So the workload for them is huge. And they needed something to get faster, become faster publishing this. So we were discussing with them, and we already did an earlier project about early English print, where we had something similar, but it was not quite ideal because it was not generic. It was very tailored to this particular early English print project. So we re-implemented it for the US State Department. So another example of how actual edition projects influence the development. So this leads to what I would call community-driven development, which is very much what I have in mind when talking about those things. During those 25 years, I think it has always been the community pointing out the problems and actually pushing for solutions. And one big advantage is that, yeah, an open source project is somewhat always interdisciplinary, because there will be people so there will be engineers, but there are also the users, which might be art historians or linguists and so on. And the art is to get all those people to talk together. So years back, I had a very good colleague working for a major corporation, and we met in Prague, during XML Prague, and we had this evening having beers with a lot of people. And then he approached me and said, hey, I always thought that you are successful as a project with XSDB because you are great developers. But in fact, I now learned that's not the case. You're very successful because you managed to get all those people together and talk. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, you know, without now wanting to highlight my own achievements or so, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. You need to be able to get people together and talk and hack things and tinker with things, and then you will find solutions. And in particular for us, like Magdalena and me, I think our unique position and what really makes fun working for us is that we get in touch with so many completely different projects. So at the same time, at the moment, I do like the edition of medievals, the writing, the biography of a medieval saint. I'm doing Chinese Buddhist inscriptions, many other things, all at the same time. So I get a lot of different perspectives from very different disciplines. And this somehow helps to paint a very colorful picture of what the problems are and how to solve them. And this then also helps to achieve more generalizable solutions than just tailoring something for one particular project. So I think for successful open source projects, it is important that they function as a communication hub, integrating a lot of different perspectives. And at times this can be very stressful, yeah, because there will also be conflicts and there will be competing interests and competing perspectives. But a project needs to somehow deal with that. It needs to cross disciplinary boundaries, and it can bring people together who would otherwise never meet. That brings us to the major problem, and I think it is very nicely expressed in this comic you see. The problem is simply that an open source project is a loosely coupled network of individuals if it is successful. I mean, there are many projects which are powered by a single corporation, but most of the really successful projects which exist over decades, they are, yeah, individuals. And that poses a problem because obviously funding always needs some formal institution to fund. And I can say that neither XSDB nor TI Publisher ever received direct funding, in the sense that some agency said, hey, you're doing a great job, let's give us some money. That never happened. So it's always projects kind of splitting off a part of the money they have and investing it into open source. Which is also why 2020 e-Editiones was founded. The immediate reason was a particular political situation in Switzerland, where suddenly, let's say, edition projects felt left a bit alone by politics and funding policies, because suddenly the funding policy was all going towards metadata, semantic web, you know? And somehow the edition said, yeah, but what's with our texts? We need our texts as well. It's not enough to just have metadata. So they were in a very particular position, and many of them were already using TI Publisher. And so they decided, yeah, we need to do something, so let's self-organize. And that led to e-Editiones. But it's not, despite being a non-profit society registered in Switzerland, it's not a Swiss thing. It is meant to be international, and we have members also here in Poland, in other countries, a lot of other countries. So basically the role of e-Editiones should be to represent the community towards institutions, funding agencies, and so on. It owns, so to say, because nobody owns open source code, but e-Editiones signs responsible for all the core components of TI Publisher. And where do we stand now? So e-Editiones itself, including TI Publisher, I think has quite a good recognition internationally. So on the map you see roughly some of the projects which chose to share information about themselves. So we know that this is only a part, so maybe a third, maybe a quarter, we don't know. We're an open source project, we are not tracking who's using our software. But this is those people who actually shared that information. The problem is that, e-Editiones itself, the membership fees for individual members are rather low. So the requirement would be to actually have some money to put into open source, would be that there would be more institutions paying membership fees, which has unfortunately not happened that much so far. So we do have institutional members, but the amounts coming together that way, that's just not sustainable. So this means that a lot of maintenance and community work is still voluntary. So people doing things in their spare time, which is great. And I think the spirit and the atmosphere benefits from this, because people are really burning for what they do. But for sure, you would also like to compensate them at some point. And for sure, our choice of new features is largely determined by the projects who sponsor them. And that's like something I often hear, why do you now do this feature and not another? Because there is a project and they have funding and they pay for it. So what might be possible solutions? So we will start now with working groups to better engage community members. I already said something about winning more institutional members. Ideally, we should be able to actually find some stable base funding from national infrastructures, which would enable us to at least, say, pay one person for maintaining, because maintenance, that's what costs time and money. And there might be other ways for the society to earn money for open source, but that's an open question how to actually do that. However, TI Publisher 10 will also be a move toward in this direction. And I want to just mention that because it will introduce a major refactoring, changing the relation between custom apps and core. And it will feature modular pluggable profiles to match specific requirements. For example, if you're doing a correspondence edition, there would be a profile and you can choose that, and if your data corresponds with the expectations for that profile, it would work out of the box. And our big hope is that this makes it even easier for the community to actually contribute such profiles for their specific research domain, because that's what we actually want in order to further improve the whole system, to make it easier for people doing the same thing. Like if you're doing a correspondence edition in, I don't know, Chinese, Japanese, or in Arabic, or in Polish, it doesn't really matter. The basic requirements will be more or less the same. So this is a great opportunity, in fact, to save time, nerves, and money by cooperating on creating such profiles. Yeah, and that's the end then of my talk. Thank you very much. Open for questions.